This is the Unearthing Art Podcast with Michele Luminato and Bec Lee, where we dig into the messy reality of making art that matters, raw and real conversations about being an artist, navigating the creative process, and expressing our honest and sometimes weird selves. So last week we leaked that I've been bored a lot in my creative journey, and I loved some of the responses that we got and just heard like a lot of, I think, that acceptance of like, hey, it's okay to say I'm bored and what can we do about it? But I also feel like there's a lot of layers to that beneath, which is not surprising because that's what we do in this podcast. And what it's really uncovering for me is how critical growth is for my journey to give me a fresh perspective. And it's not something that's like a set and forget. You know, I went to art school, tick, I learned everything there. That's it, tick. Don't need to relook at anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's the growth that helps me keep seeing new things.
Well, immediately I want to flip it.
Yeah. I love that about you.
But when I think about the growth and what you're talking about, it really strikes me that the growth approach is only possible and works because things are always changing. So that's what I mean by flip it. Yes. It's kind of the underlying thing of what are we dealing with is continual change. And I think it's pretty fair and easy to say at this point in time that most human beings aren't great with change. Yeah. We like things to stay pretty much the same. As a general statement, as a personal statement, yeah, I really struggle with change. Yeah. you might be a change savant.
I'm the opposite. I love change. I love, purging my house of things that don't feel relevant. Like I think I actually really crave change. So this will be good. I think we should get into the differences there because the world does change, all the time. It's not static. And I think our vision and how we see the world evolves and changes by those experiences that we take in, just as being human.
And while the world changes around us and we can recognize that happening and resent it or embrace it, I think when we're talking about creating art and the kind of, I guess, dynamics that we've been talking about here, even more tricky is the fact that we're changing. But I don't think we necessarily think that. It's kind of a layered thing. Like on one hand, how comfortable are we with the idea that we are changing as human beings, as ourselves? People look back at photos of themselves 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and, you look at the hairstyles and you look at the clothes and you think about the music that you listen to and the choices you made. And on one hand, in that kind of, let's say, superficial way, we quite easily say, oh, yeah, I changed in some ways, like I look like a different person. My taste has changed. Like it seems like, the way we might have decorated our room when we were 14 years old versus how we decorate our house.
Let's hope that changed. Okay. Yes.
As a 40 or 50-year-old. So we seem to be okay with that idea. At the same time, I feel like it's a bit of a badge of honor to say, like, well, I haven't changed in my essentials. I'm still the same person. I'm still the same person. That kind of thing where you don't want to, almost like it's a bad thing to admit that going through the world and having things happen changes who you are. It's like who we are versus what we like or what we choose. And I don't know, this could be just a bit super too deep philosophical and beyond our capabilities to discuss. I mean, who are we? Who are we if not the things we like and what we choose?
I was just thinking, because I instantly, when you said that, I went back to 9/11 and how profoundly changed I felt from that experience. Not that, the core of Michele wasn't there, but my perspective definitely shifted. And part of that was just because of how close I was to it all and the trauma that I experienced and just that probably that vulnerability and naivety, is that the right way to say that? I'm terrible with words. That shifted. Like there was just some shifts that just happened in that time and space for me. And how could that not affect the work that I wanted to make? So,
and how could, again, I'm probably drifting far beyond the scope of the Unearthing Art podcast here, but how could, if you think about it, if that had not happened, if Michele had not experienced that, if that had never happened, would Michele be the same person she is today doing, you know, the sort of thing that she does now? And so... Yeah. And see, that's the thing. We do change. It might be, you know, more subtle than we notice. Sometimes it could be more dramatic. I definitely can think of a few times where it was probably a little more dramatic of just this... You know, and it was very unsettling. I don't think that it was like, oh, that felt really good. Like it wasn't, it was very unsettling to feel, you know, big shifts, especially when it's a hardship or something. I think that really kind of puts a new twist on our perspective. But the person who has gained strength and freedom from those hardships, again, this is just my personal experience. The vision that I had after that was really like, okay, you get one life, let's go for it. And so that gave me a freedom to pursue that vision. It's unraveling in front of me, but what it looked like then looks different than now. And even what it looked like 2 years ago looks different now. And so there's a different vantage point once we've experienced that. And then it's, you know, how does that impact? What do we do next? How do we see next? And again, I'm really interested in how do we see new? How do we invigorate ourselves? How do we stimulate ourselves? Especially with my, you know, acknowledgement of boredom. I think that that's really important to my work. And it makes it so much more fun too. So I went off on a little tangent there. Sorry about that. Well, no, I am loving the tangent, actually, because I just wanted to share a little something about that idea of how we're changed by big experiences. When we first started, we talked about our backgrounds a little bit, and one of those kind of defining experiences, and for me, was at the age of 20 being diagnosed with a chronic condition which has continued with me, you know, over 20 years with medication and treatment. Well managed, but there's been surgeries, there's been tough times. And the interesting thing about that is that after I'd been diagnosed and had started that process and the path and everything that involved, there was a newsletter put together by, you know, one of the associations that support patients. And they did interviews with people. And in my interview, she asked a question of, if you could go back in time and never have had Crohn's is what I have, would you do it? And at that stage, I'm probably like 5 years in, something like that. But it gave me pause. And when I was recounting this story to somebody else, they immediately said, well, yeah, why wouldn't you? Why would you choose a path that has like pain and limitations and uncertainty? But in that moment, I was saying to the lady interviewing me, I'm not sure that I would. And she said, you know, I've done a lot of these, and the majority of people say that they wouldn't change it, that they wouldn't go back and choose not. Now, why on earth could that be the case? The reason I think like that now is that I'm not sure. Like if I could go back and have all the same insights that I have now, just exactly. minus the pain and the suffering, then sign me up.
Yeah.
But would I give up now? Would I be the same person? Would I have made certain decisions in my life and prioritized certain things? And, you know, I think that experience has made me like a softer person, a more compassionate person. It really unlocked things for me. And I think that's the 9/11 experience. The other thing that makes me then think, bringing us back to like what is this strange relationship we have with wanting to feel like we've always been the same person, but yet at the same time we're so changeable, and sliding doors, different paths taken. We could have been a different person. I do feel like there's sort of seeds of who we are from, from birth. Like we have experiences from day one. We have our genetics. So I think there are those seeds there, seeds being an important word, but would certain seeds have bloomed not given the right circumstances or the right soil?
Oh, that's a good analogy.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
So it doesn't stay the same. It doesn't. We have so many potentialities. So
Yes.
I guess what I'm trying to do is come up with a story, because all of these are just stories that we tell ourselves, aren't they? But trying to come up with a story to sort of explain how we can both embrace that idea that there are, because, we talk about this as well, Michele. We do have unique perspectives. It's not like we're saying that we're just a glass of clear water and there's nothing about us which is identifiably us. Of course there is, because when we make art in all different ways, you can also see Bec and you can also see Michele. But who that is also so fluid, like the expression of Bec and the expression of Michele. There are all these different potentialities and all these different kind of seeds blooming and being uncovered. That's the other thing. I know I'm going on super long here.
Your analogy is so spot on, because it is like seeds. And I love that analogy of, it's like there's all this soil and there's the seeds, but if you're not in the right environment for that seed to bloom, it's not going to come, And my husband planted some garden stuff. Like I literally was like, wow, look at the difference with the soil and how that affects the seeds.
Yes. And I think that when we talk about seeing Bec and seeing Michele, there are things about us things that we have within us to express that we could still go our whole lives without ever actually coming to the surface. Because, for example, if I hadn't gone through what I went through, I don't think I would have dropped some of the masks. That's the other thing in this. So you can think of it less as being changing in essentially who we are. But as we get older, we start to strip back stuff.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then it's not that you've radically become a different person per se. It's that these seeds have been allowed to grow, or you've allowed something to be revealed. These are all
totally
my thoughts.
No, and my brain instantly, because we're visual people, I was visualizing, like, if you imagine this row of garden, and it's got all these seeds in this whole row, and at the beginning of your life there's a few that pop up, and then life keeps happening, and depending on the environment and the conditions, a few more pop up. But honestly, I think it is about letting go of masks and things. And that's where, 9/11 there was an innocence to me that was before that happened, that, maybe it was naive, maybe whatever. It shifted that. And that was part of growing up as well, because I was in my early 30s when that happened. But I think that it is around these subtle shifts of the human experience that really either build up a mask, and add to the facade, or it helps take the masks down and helps kind of evolve you into this full flourishing garden that is your own, or it's the garden of someone else's. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love the garden, and I love that it connects. I think it miraculously it connects to what we started talking about, because how that all ties into this idea of making art, and whether you have this kind of growth approach or to beware of where you're getting fixed in your idea of what the garden looks like, which is what we are getting to. If you have an idea of this is who I am, if you have an idea of I already know about XYZ, it's like you're sort of super gluing those masks in place, that you're not allowing anything unusual. You're not allowing, how sometimes I've had this in the yard, this strange little flower pops up in the middle of the lawn.
Yes.
I'm like, where did that come from? I didn't put that there. I don't know how it got there. But so you can either rush over and yank it out and go, that's not what I expect to see on this stretch of lawn. Or you can go, oh, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll find some more and plant some more in that spot because it's doing so well there. Allowing those things to come out, and also understanding that what you may have thought you were growing 2 years ago and what you may have been planting 2 years ago can be really different. Be like, if you check in with yourself at this point in time, because we're talking about this in relation to, it was just last episode, wasn't it? We were talking about revisiting our sources of creativity and how I'd taken a moment to really, after much resistance, which is exactly what we're talking about here. I thought, no, I've been through this process with you last year, Michele. I looked at what was speaking to me. I reflected on what I had within me to say. I thought about the kind of art I wanted to make. I had my sources of inspiration. I did the whole thing. Here's what it is, and I'm not going to do all that again. I'm clear. I did it 12 months ago.
Listen to the certainty. This is the part that I think is the core of this episode. We have so much certainty in what's in front of us and what we see, right? We're like, I did this. This is what I see. I've solved it. And we feel really certain about that, picture. But I'll bet you money if I take you tomorrow and I show you new images tomorrow, I'm just using images as an example, your perspective has changed again, and
yes.
I really believe this with my whole heart. I don't believe that we should have that much certainty in everything. And I think one of the fun reasons why is because there's no possibility in that certainty. It's so fixed. It's so limited to what you've already seen. And I think
stagnates.
It stagnates totally. I mean, I think that we can look at an image, and I'll just use an image as an example again. We can look at an image one day, we're inspired by it, and then we're not because we're tired of it. It's like the same thing when you want to rearrange your living room or lounge room. You're just bored with the setup, and it stagnates. Yeah. Like when you first do it, you're like, oh, this is great, I love it, it's fresh. And then it's like, you're like, oh, this old room again?
And I feel that quite literally, like stagnation versus, it's like a flow of energy. So a room can feel, or a studio, or a piece of work, a painting that you're working on, it can feel like the energy has stopped moving. It's literally just stagnating. You don't feel anything towards it. You don't feel any kind of momentum going forward into the future with it, or you can shake things up. Like the way we talk about things, it's quite literal, really. You can shake things up, you can get the energy moving, it's like the flow of energy from within yourself, and also with whatever's happening on the canvas or the page or in the clay, whatever it is.
For me, I definitely find that everything stagnates for me, like the studio space, the images I surround myself, my inspiration, my own work. And I think this is the tricky part is, unless you find a way to constantly keep that fresh, you'll sabotage it. And it might not be that you need to throw, the baby out with the bathwater. You just might need to add some fresh water. How do we add new fresh water? I mean, isn't a pond like that as well? Like, I don't know about any kind of landscape thing.
Dig out the whole pond. And
I just remember seeing, and this is me being very not aware of how nature actually works. So forgive my science.
This is great. I'm ready for this. I'm ready for your interpretation of what happens in water ecosystems.
When water it's like it's stale and it's toxic. I don't know what happens, but
it's
as
sludgy,
a child, it's
smelly.
sludge. I just remember it being like, ooh, it's not nice. Sludgy, stale, not fresh air. I mean, lock up a house during winter. What do you have? A stale house. So I think that our creative practice is like this. And again, for me, I think it happens more frequently than I used to realize. So it used to be that I thought, oh, I'll kind of relook at things once a year. That's not enough for me. I just pointed out on the last episode that I relooked at my color sources of, giving me a fresh perspective twice in 1 month.
That's outrageous, Michele.
That's crazy. But what it did for me is like there's no stale air. There's no sludgy stuff that I'm pushing up a hill. There's no resistance for me to get into the studio. You know, it's still surprising and uncertain, but it's much more inspiring. So
what you were saying then about how this used to show up for you previously really rang a bell for me, because I think that a lot of artists experience that stop and starting. Definitely. I've experienced it. I know, talking to other artists, we all experience that, and we can feel a bit dysfunctional. You know, like, it's one step forward, two steps back. You know, you start down one project, one idea, you feel really excited about it, and then one day the engine just runs out and you just kind of putter to a stop and you don't know what's wrong. And that's when we were talking about the different kind of symptoms that can show up, like procrastination, avoiding the studio, feeling like you've lost track, like you're on the wrong path, a lot of self-doubt. And that's when, like you say, it's baby with the bathwater. You're like, oh, this whole thing sucks. Throw that out. Now I have to think up a whole new idea, and, you know, that feels overwhelming. So it's funny because on one hand we're talking about being open to change, but on the other hand, as always the case with these strange paradoxes, if you're trying to be too fixed and not recognize that you change and that your interests can change, and also the kind of richness that kind of flexibility can bring, in being too fixed, you end up almost changing too much. Because now you're throwing everything out, and you're losing continuity, you're losing momentum. I guess maybe, you know, rather than looking at it again as a binary of things are changing or they're not changing, it's kind of like flow, like the flow of water and, you know, the stagnant pond that we're talking about. And if you can flow with the parts that are changing, it's a real kind of graceful and get more adept at kind of harnessing the flow of creativity,
absolutely,
when new stuff comes through. And what do you think about that?
Instantly I had an analogy related to water again, because I was thinking that's how it is. It's like you either stay in this stuffy pond that's smelly and stinky and sludgy, or you go find the river and you just start flowing down the stream, you know, and you're in the river going with the current, and the current takes you. And that's why I'm so excited. Like, I just love that we can go with the current and we can freshen up things. I really don't find as much stop start in my studio anymore. It's funny because I've never really thought about it like that, because back when it was stop start, of course, I remember frustration like no end. Like I felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill to be a painter, you know, like you're like, oh my God, this is so hard. But I think the more I embrace my own strategies of, you know, what we use in origin art, it literally, I have no stop and start. It's continual. It's always flowing. So I feel like I'm on the river. Sometimes I have to stop and double up on things, like the way I did with color this month twice. But it's this constant flow of moving. And so if there is any, you know, hesitation or slow down stage, it usually only happens for a week when I'm kind of realizing, okay, I'm not moving forward. Why am I not moving forward? But then I go in and sort of buckle down on what I can do to solve that, and then I move forward. So very much on the flow of a river.
And I think, of course, hindsight's 2020. And the other thing that's 2020 is when we are talking to, and another reason why you and I, Michele, are kind of lucky in being able to have these conversations, because we also get to have these conversations with other artists. And isn't it always 100% easier to look at what someone else is doing and see clearly these, you know, where they're getting hung up in the river and where they're not going. But when you're in that moment, and I can totally relate, and this happens to me the other way, you know, Michele says, Bec, what about this? And to me, it's like a blank wall. Like in the moment we get hung up, we're flowing along the river, and then we get caught, on like a rock that's blocking the flow, and we think we're making it easier for ourselves. We think that we're keeping things simple by saying, no, I have that bit worked out. I know how this works, and it's like this. And you just, block out. You think by blocking stuff out, it's going to make it easier, but actually you make it so much harder for yourself, which we can see from the outside.
Yeah,
as I say,
totally.
the external point of view, of course, it's always the same. You can always, give advice to others, and then you struggle to apply it yourself.
Yes.
As opposed to, as you say, if you can let go of some of those fixed structures that you have about yourself and about what works for you, you just get back in the flow of the water and let it happen, like less working for it, more, here's something. Yeah. Does that resonate with you? It
does. And the thing that came up for me was assumptions. We have so many assumptions. When you were talking and you're like, I got that worked out, I already have that. There's an assumption that what is there is working for you. There's an assumption that that's all you need right now to move forward, and there's an assumption in knowing, which is great because we're like, we're confident. I got this. But I think that there's an expression, and I usually don't swear, but isn't there this phrase of like, assumption is really making an ass out of you and me? So I think for me, I always question my assumptions, and that might be more into the growth mindset as well. But I never assume that I know what I'm doing with color, with all my color experience. And I think that is a fun place to come from, because if I assume I know everything, how boring, for one. And then two, is it going to give me anything new? Will I discover something new in that moment? No. So I just feel like if we can stop assuming so much, even though we've, taken all the courses, or we've gone to art school, or we've done the basic exercise 1,000,000 times. And I'm saying that about myself.
This is one of those being human things. We can say this till the cows come home, but of course we're always making, like, you and I, Michele, by no means, just because we can say this means that we do this 100% of the time. We're always making assumptions. There are always more aspects, whether it's in the studio or probably in life, where we could be unlocking something, hold something a little more gently, a little more lightly, I guess, rather than hanging on to it. And so that's just a bit of, like you say, that's something that you can apply at any point in time. When I think, because I'm thinking about now, and I'm there a lot of the time, believe me, when you're hitched up on that rock in the stream, and you're sort of stuck, and the water's bashing up against you, and you're like, why is this not working for me? Why is this not working? You're like, let go of the rock. That's what you're yelling at me from the shore. Let go of the rock.
You don't need the rock. The current's moving. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we see that in our own lives? I think, like you're saying, think about assumptions. Notice any time you say, but that's sorted, stop and go, hang on. Is there something that I'm assuming is a fixed thing,
totally.
but it isn't a fixed thing?
Yeah.
And it strikes me that, I've heard you talk about this, beginner's mind. Like, go back to being a beginner. Don't assume I did this course, I did that course, I did a color course, I did 10 color courses, so now I know I've got my color worked out. Like, apply those assumptions the opposite way. Assume you know nothing.
Yes.
About anything.
Yes.
And say, if I knew nothing, if none of this was fixed, if none of this was for sure, how many different, places would that give me where I could tweak something, leverage something, get a fresh input on it?
Totally. And I'm in the middle of color, so I keep talking about that because that's where my head is in my studio. But I can give you an example of an assumption where because I have worked with so much color, over 20 years, my brain thinks it knows a lot. And I find that I'll go into the studio and I'll start mixing something up, trying to do something that's recalling a memory of a color. And I'm like, yep, I just do a little of that, a little bit of that. And a lot of times I do get it right. But then there's times where I'm like, no, that's not what it looks like. And so I have to stop assuming, literally go print out an example of what I'm trying to achieve and then put it right next to me, because I think our brain and memory plays tricks on us as well.
There is one level, I think, that a listener could have, a perception that you could have about this conversation, that we're saying, oh, be open to revisiting color, be open to revisiting how you make things and what your process is. But also going back to where we started, there's a really deep level of be open to the idea that the color that you thought you liked last week may not be a color that you like anymore. You know, the fact is that current that we're talking about is you as well. You know, it's not just carrying you down the river. It's like flowing through you too. We're made of lots of water.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of source that we talk about a lot, isn't it? Making connections to that. When we talk about this creative source, that when you can loosen your grip a little bit and allow your creative source to flow in a really authentic, natural way, your source isn't just one pond of ideas. Your source is actually a river that never stops flowing. How you react to things, how they react to you, what appears important and not important. Like there's just lots and lots of, let's start mixing those metaphors now. There's lots and lots of seeds of potential that have yet to even bloom, you know? So
Totally.
It's always something new that has a possibility of coming if you just keep flowing with it.
Yeah. And I think you were speaking into something that I was thinking at the same time, which is it's about context as well, you know, because again, I keep thinking about color, and the context of color for me personally has really shifted. And so what might be something that maybe, you know, 5 years or even 3 years for that matter, that I did not like in that context, maybe in a different context, I'm going to like it. So I think that that's where on that river, that context has changed. Those seeds around you that have blossomed as well, you know, they've changed and they've grown into something different. And so it looks different.
You're absolutely right. There are so many variables because things gain different meanings for you. Like sticking with the idea of color, you know, I was all about blue a year ago, and it had a particular meaning for me. And now I am exploring different ways of expressing that meaning in ways other than the color blue. But because I am discovering new ways that are meaningful to me, it's a deepening of that meaning, or it's a reimagining of, you know, it's
the context.
It is the process. Yeah, it's the context, it's the flow. It feels like it's along the same journey, let's say, of that. You know, it's not something so harsh as saying, oh, blue's not in trend anymore, so now I have to paint in this color. That feels just like completely wild to me at this point in time to think in that way, because you can be completely in this flow that we're talking about, in this river of ideas and inspiration and context and your own experience and how you're feeling and relating to the world moment to moment, always changing. That's where this, like, never, how can you possibly have a fixed single thing that is you in the face of all that flux and change?
And to add to that, a fixed process that is static. This is why I'm like, if anything, it's more of, you know, really kind of fine tuning it so that you can really grow faster. In my opinion, I find that it helps me to shine light on it more often so I can grow faster because it's moving. So me saying, okay, it's moving, how do I just keep moving with it? It's much more effective.
I think if I was going to summarize the theme of all this, it's that it's around not only understanding how changeable everything is, how fluid everything is, and kind of coming to terms with that and finding a way to just deal with it. You know, how do I just survive all this fluid and change? But actually, how do I like swim in it? How do I love it? Because it is the accelerator that you're harnessing I think, Michele.
Yes.
It is the accelerator that brings a lot of ease and joy and fun and potential and surprises and
yes.
all the wonderful things to your process and your art.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially, as I stated last time, I am middle-aged and I'm looking for an adventure, and I'd like to consider my studio like it's the adventure, and that's where I think if you're feeling stagnant, you're feeling like, you're in that swampy, sludgy, not going anywhere, feel stale, possibly bored, and if you haven't heard that last week's episode, listen to that. But I think it could be that you have changed and your perspective has changed. And so it's time to adjust and find a way to see a new perspective.
And go with the flow.
Yes, go with the flow. I love our little swampy flow river analogies.